A wounded mother hippo charges, scattering armed poachers with thunderous fury, her baby trembling just steps behind. A single gunshot echoes, pain searing through her leg, yet she refuses to fall. Then, the unthinkable. The poacher lowers his rifle, caught in a moment no one saw coming. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Henry's wide eye is darted, searching for anything familiar. The thick reeds, the muddy banks, the cool embrace of the water, all were out of reach. The helplessness clawed at his chest, a suffocating weight that pressed him down. The loneliness was as sharp as the sun's rays, and a soft whimper escaped his lips, fragile and desperate. He did not understand why he had wandered so far, why the world suddenly felt so hostile and empty. Not far away, moving with deliberate care and measured steps, was Grace, the matriarch of her elephant herd. Her towering frame bore the marks of time, scars etched faintly across her wrinkled skin, tusks dulled by years of weather and toil. There was a quiet strength in her gaze, a serenity that belied the grief she carried inside. Years ago, she had lost her own calf to the ruthless forces of nature, an ache that had hollowed her soul, but also awakened a fierce compassion. Since then, Grace had taken it upon herself to shield the vulnerable, to mend broken spirits, even when she could not mend her own. Grace's ears flared softly as she caught the faint, pitiful cries carried on the dry breeze. Instinct pulled her toward the sound, a silent summons she could not ignore. As she drew closer, the shadow of her immense body fell across Henry's fragile figure. The baby hippo's trembling grew worse, and he shrank back, unsure whether this enormous presence meant safety or danger. But Grace's eyes were gentle, filled with the depth of 1,000 silent promises. She lowered her massive head slowly, careful not to intimidate, her breath a warm whisper against the dry earth. Every inch of her movement spoke of tenderness, an unspoken vow to protect rather than threaten. Grace was driven not by instinct alone, but by a profound need to right a personal loss, to extend the compassion she yearned to receive herself. In Henry, she saw more than a helpless creature. She saw a chance for redemption, a chance to rewrite a story marred by grief. Henry's small frame quivered beneath her gaze, the instinct to flee warring with the faint flicker of hope Grace ignited. His mind wrestled with confusion and fear, yet something in the elephant's calm presence seeped through the panic. She was not a predator, but a guardian, and in her eyes a fragile promise shimmered, of safety, of rescue, of a future where he would no longer face the harshness of the world alone. In this moment, the savannah held its breath. The old elephant and the stranded hippo existed suspended between fear and trust, between past sorrows and future hope. The dry plains, harsh and unforgiving, seemed to soften beneath Grace's quiet determination. She was not just crossing a physical distance, but bridging the gap between despair and salvation, between a shattered past and the possibility of healing. Grace's motivation was deeply personal, more than duty, more than instinct. It was a sacred mission born of pain transformed into purpose. By reaching out to Henry, she sought to heal her own broken heart, to find meaning in loss through the act of saving another. For Henry, who had wandered far from safety, this was no longer just a chance encounter, but a turning point. The fragile bond forming between them was the first thread in a story woven from compassion, resilience, and the miraculous power of unexpected friendship. As the afternoon heat bore down, the shadow of Grace stretched longer, enveloping Henry not in menace, but in the promise of protection. The baby hippo's whimpers softened, a tentative trust beginning to grow beneath the vast, open sky. The plains seemed less empty now, charged with the quiet strength of a heart willing to give and a soul desperate to receive. Here, amid the cracked earth and endless sun, a miracle was quietly taking root, one that would forever change the lives of two very different creatures, bound by the fragile, unbreakable thread of compassion. Grace moved deliberately now, each step measured, her large frame carefully bridging the gap between Henry's trembling uncertainty and the promise of the river's refuge. Her thick, leathery skin glistened faintly with dust and sweat beneath the relentless sun, but there was a grace, an unyielding steadiness in her movements that began to calm the fragile hippo calf. The first hours had been fraught with terror for Henry, every sound a threat, every shadow a looming predator. But Grace's gentle nudges, the subtle rustle of her ears and trunk brushing aside sharp thorns and fallen branches, whispered safety into his quivering soul. Slowly, hesitantly, Henry's whimpers diminished, replaced by tentative steps following her immense silhouette. Each obstacle Grace removed from their path was a testament to her purpose. Branches that could tear delicate skin, thorny bushes that could trap small hooves, even the low-lying rocks that might trip a faltering step. She used her strength not only as protection, but as a promise that the journey, though perilous, would end with salvation. Beneath the weight of the searing sun, the landscape stretched out, both harsh and beautiful, the burnt ochres of dry grass meeting the shimmering line of the distant river. The scent of water grew stronger, moist earth promising relief and renewal. Yet beneath this promise lurked unseen dangers, shadows as deadly as the poachers who haunted these lands. From the thicket came the faint, deliberate crunch of boots on dry brush. Eyes sharp and calculating watched Grace and Henry, voices muted but carrying the cold certainty of hunters accustomed to death and profit. A group of men, drawn by the rumors whispered among their circles, elephant ivory worth a fortune, exotic animals destined for black markets, had tracked the pair. Their presence introduced a tension far grimmer than the natural dangers of the savannah. This was no mere predator. This was human greed made manifest. At the center was Carter, a man whose face was weathered and hard, marked by years in the unforgiving wilderness, and darker choices he scarcely dared remember. His eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed a man consumed by contradiction. Beneath the veneer of ruthless poacher lay a fractured soul wrestling with regret, guilt that gnawed at him in the quiet moments. Carter had taken lives, destroyed families, and yet, buried deep within was a faint ember of hope. Hope for redemption, for a different path. That ember flickered now, unstable and uncertain, as he watched Grace's maternal vigilance and Henry's fragile trust. The poachers closed in as Grace and Henry neared the river's edge. Grace's ears flicked sharply, the subtle shift in the air prickling her ancient instincts. She sensed the humans before they were fully revealed, a threat beyond teeth and claws. Her massive body tensed, every muscle coiled in readiness. Then, with a trumpet that shattered the stillness, Grace announced her defiance. The sound was both a warning and a declaration, a call for peace, a threat of fierce protection. The poachers hesitated, momentarily unprepared for the raw power embodied in Grace's charge. She moved with surprising speed, her enormous legs pounding the earth, scattering the men like leaves before a storm. Dust erupted around them as the hunters scrambled, guns raised, shouts piercing the air. Grace's charge was not without consequence. A sharp crack, the sickening report of a rifle shot, and a bullet grazed her leg. Pain exploded, searing through muscle and bone, but she did not falter. Her determination to shield Henry, to see him safe, eclipsed her own suffering. In that chaotic moment, time seemed to freeze. Carter's face betrayed a violent internal struggle, a war waged between the man he had been and the man he yearned to become. The bullet wound, the fear in Henry's eyes, the unyielding strength of Grace, all collided within him like thunderclaps. For a heartbeat he lowered his weapon, torn between seizing this brutal moment to extinguish the rescue or stepping away, granting mercy where cruelty had long been the rule. The shock hung thick in the air, not just from the gunfire or the charge, but from Carter's hesitation. It was a fracture in the merciless facade, a crack where humanity threatened to break through. Grace stood wounded, but unbroken, a living shield embodying sacrifice. Henry, vulnerable yet protected, looked to the horizon where water promised life. And Carter, a man caught between past sins and future hope, stood at the precipice of choice, his next action carrying the weight of lives, of futures, and the fragile chance of salvation. The air hung heavy with dust and tension, the fading echoes of the gunshot still trembling over the sun-baked earth. Grace's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, each step a trial against the burning agony radiating from her wounded leg. Yet she moved with a fierce determination born not just of instinct, but of profound purpose, a mother's will to protect, a guardian's promise to shelter the innocent no matter the cost. Her eyes, deep pools of ancient wisdom and unyielding resolve, remained fixed on Henry, whose tiny form now clung to the fragile thread of hope she embodied. Carter's weapon lowered slowly, hesitance softening the hard lines of his weathered face. The weight of years spent hunting and killing pressed heavily upon him, yet something in Grace's defiant stance, something in Henry's wide, vulnerable eyes stirred a long-dormant ember within. Compassion, long buried beneath the scars of regret and the cold veneer of survival, flickered uncertainly. His breath caught, ragged and uneven, as he made a choice that shattered the merciless resolve that had defined him for so long. "Stand down!" he barked over the murmurs of his men, voice rough but unmistakable. Confusion rippled through the group, but the unmistakable authority in Carter's tone silenced all dissent. Slowly, one by one, the men lowered their weapons, uncertainty shadowing their faces. The savannah seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a fragile moment where violence yielded to mercy. Kneeling beside Grace, Carter's hands moved clumsily but with surprising gentleness. The roughness of a lifetime spent wielding rifles replaced, if only momentarily, by the careful touch of a man confronting the vulnerability of life itself. The wound, deep and bleeding, was cleaned with water carried in a battered canteen. The sting of antiseptic filled the dry air, sharp but necessary. Grace's trunk curled lightly around his wrist in a gesture of trust, a silent acceptance of help from the very hands that moments before had threatened her life. The poachers watched in silence, their eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and awe at the unexpected act of Grace, human and elephant intertwined by fate in this crucible of survival. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains, Grace rose, steadied by a strength that defied her injury. Her gaze swept the horizon, finding the distant shimmer of the river like a beacon of salvation. With cautious, deliberate steps, she began the journey back, the earth beneath her heavy but navigable. Henry, emboldened by the promise of safety and the newfound bond between elephant and man, trotted beside her, his small form growing steadier with each stride. The riverbank was alive with motion and emotion. Henry's family, a throng of hippos wallowing in the cool water, lifted their heads as the familiar, fragile figure appeared on the horizon. Anxious eyes met the exhausted calf, and then, with a chorus of relieved grunts and whistles, the reunion unfolded in a rush of joyous energy. Henry plunged into the water with abandon, the coolness enveloping him like a balm. His family circled, nudging and welcoming him back into the fold, a living testament to resilience against the harshness of the world. Grace watched quietly, pain etched across her features, but overshadowed by a profound sense of accomplishment. The harsh landscape had tested her, pushed her to the brink, yet here she stood, a living monument to the power of sacrifice and the indomitable spirit of life. The river's gentle flow whispered promises of renewal, washing away the scars of the day. Carter remained behind, his silhouette dark against the dying light. His heart wrestled with ghosts of his past, memories sharpened by the day's violent encounters and softened by the miracle unfolding before him. The hardened man who had once seen the world only as prey and profit now found himself changed, stirred by the silent lessons of forgiveness and hope. He stood alone, yet not lonely, for in the bond between Grace and Henry he glimpsed the possibility of his own redemption. The night crept in, the savannah settling into quiet reverence. Grace, wounded but resolute, lifted her head proudly toward the rising stars. Henry's joyful splashes echoed softly across the water, a hymn of new beginnings. And Carter, walking away from the river's edge, carried with him a fragile seed of transformation, a testament to the unexpected salvation compassion can bring, even amid the darkest shadows of the wild.